Before we begin, make sure to like the video, drop a comment telling us your favorite alien species, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next chapter of this story. Now let's get into it. Rylan Ward had been summoned before, but never like this. Never by a council courier who refused to speak, never with a datapad stamped in red sigils that said immediate compliance required. The frigate that carried him through the council's shimmering gates didn't offer small talk or a view of the stars. It felt like a silent escort to a verdict he hadn't been told he'd earned. He sat rigid in the passenger cabin while the lights flickered against the hull, sensing the weight of something waiting for him at the end of the journey, something that made even veteran soldiers walk softly. When the doors opened, he stepped into the marble blue glow of the council's grand atrium, where a dozen alien species watched him with the same expression. Controlled anxiety, threaded with distrust. Rylan felt it like static under his skin. Humans were tolerated, respected in some circles, but not trusted. Not fully. Not yet. A tall Avashan delegate moved toward him with a stiffness that suggested fear. Its crystalline joints clicked as it extended a hand. Captain Rylan Ward. The council appreciates your haste. That's one word for it, Rylan replied. What's going on? The delegate hesitated, glancing toward the sealed northern wing. A situation has developed. A prisoner was brought in 3 days ago. A Varshan predator. Rylan's pulse tightened. The Varshan weren't simply feared, they were mythologized. War beasts with minds sharper than combat knives. Entire fleets had retreated at the sight of a single one prowling a battlefield. And you want me to talk to it? He asked. To attempt communication, yes. It has refused every other species. It repeats only one request. The delegate's voice dimmed as though the words themselves carried weight. It asks for the human with iron in his voice. Rylan's jaw hardened. He didn't like riddles and he liked being singled out by unknown predators even less. What does it want? That is what you must discover. It has grown agitated. The dragoons are on standby in case containment fails. Of course they were. The council's elite mercenaries never missed an opportunity to look superior. Rylan glimpsed them standing along the platform ahead, massive, armored, swaggering. Their commander, Darix Vol, smirked as Rylan approached, tapping a gauntlet that hummed with plasma charge. Look who they dragged in, Darix drawled. The council's favorite pet human. Rylan didn't slow. Still compensating with the armor, Darix? Thought the budget cuts took your shinies. A few snickers from nearby aides, Darix's grin twitched into a scowl. But Rylan didn't have time for their posturing. His attention was focused on the sealed containment hall ahead, where two-tier blast doors pulsed with warning glyphs. Inside waited a creature capable of shredding 3 decks before anyone could scream. And apparently it wanted him. A console beeped. The delegate gestured nervously. Captain, it has sensed your presence. It is becoming more active. We must proceed. They reached the final checkpoint, a narrow corridor lined with reinforced glass and armed guard stations. Through the inner window Rylan glimpsed motion. Something large, breathing slow, deliberate breaths that fogged the barrier in rhythmic bursts. Every instinct whispered caution. But he stepped inside. The door sealed behind him with a finality that suggested the council did not expect him to walk out unchanged. The holding chamber was cavernous, lit only by thin slats of cold white illumination. Chains thicker than a man's torso anchored the massive figure crouched at the center, its obsidian hide glinting like sharpened stone. It looked up the moment Rylan entered, eyes burning gold behind a lattice of scars. Rylan felt a memory stir. Dust, fire, a battlefield where he dragged a wounded creature twice his size out of collapsing ruins. A creature that had stared at him with these same eyes. A creature he had left behind to die because he'd had no choice. The Varshan shifted, metal groaning under its weight. Its voice rolled out in a low, resonant growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor. Rylan Ward. Hearing his name spoken with such precision was unsettling. The creature bowed its head in a gesture no living witness had ever described from a Varshan. You came, it said. He took a slow breath. You asked for me. I asked for the one who saved my life, the predator replied. Brother of blood. Debt-bound. The title struck him like a blow. Varshan culture carried a single unbreakable commandment. A life saved must be repaid until death. The council had not summoned him for diplomacy. They had summoned him because he was the only person this creature would not tear apart. Rylan stepped forward, each movement deliberate. Why are you here? The predator's gaze sharpened, hatred flickering beneath the surface. A trap. One set by those who fear my people. Those who seek war. They seek to kill me to ignite it. Its eyes flicked to the observation window. They are listening. Rylan didn't need to look to know the dragoons were watching, waiting for any excuse to intervene. What do you want from me? He asked. To speak truth, the predator said. To survive long enough to warn my people. And to protect you as you once protected me. Rylan's stomach dropped. If the predator believed he was in danger, then something far larger simmered beneath the council's calm surface. The room vibrated suddenly, an impact, distant but heavy. The lights flickered. Rylan lifted his head as alarms began to blare across the chamber. The predator's chains rattled as it rose to its full height, towering over him. They are coming, it growled. Not for me alone. Rylan didn't need translation. The dragoon's betrayal had just begun, and he was trapped on the wrong side of the door. The alarms pulsed through the chamber like a heartbeat gone frantic, casting brief red slashes of light across the predator's armored hide. Rylan steadied himself, forcing his breath to stay level as he stepped toward the central console, hoping the security locks weren't already overridden. The system refused his first command, then the second. Someone had seized control of the entire wing. The predator watched him with unnerving patience, as though waiting for Rylan to reach the same conclusion it already had. Your council fears me, it rumbled, voice resonant and controlled, but fear alone does not trigger sabotage. This is orchestration. This is intent. Rylan didn't argue. He had known, from the moment he saw the dragoons waiting on the platform, that something rotten clung to this assignment. The mercenary company thrived in crisis and profited from war. The presence of a live Varshan predator presented both an opportunity and a threat. If the galaxy learned that such a creature spoke calmly to a human, the dragoons would lose their favorite justification for escalating conflicts. He tried the manual override next. A steel shutter slammed shut over the control panel as if mocking his attempt. Someone wants us sealed in, he said. Someone wants us dead, the predator corrected. Its golden eyes narrowed. And they come armed. Rylan heard the distant footfalls, heavy, synchronized, militaristic. The dragoons weren't subtle. Their gait carried the arrogance of units convinced nothing could oppose them. He leaned closer to the towering creature, choosing his next words carefully. If you've got answers, now is the time. The predator lowered itself, chains grinding as though eager to snap. You saved me once. Not for reward, not for glory. You acted with instinct, sharp, decisive, unclouded by fear. Among my people, that is the mark of a warrior of true spirit. I swore a life oath to you. It is why I asked for you to come. Rylan remembered that battlefield vividly. A collapsed outpost, Varshan blood scorching the ground, an impossible decision made in seconds. He had pulled the wounded creature from the rubble because leaving it there felt wrong. He had never expected the act to echo this far across the stars. Why reveal this now? Rylan asked. Because you are not safe, the predator replied. The mercenaries do not seek to eliminate a threat to the council. They seek to ignite a war. Killing me accomplishes that. Killing you frames my people for an act of retaliation. The dragoon's boots drew closer, accompanied by the metallic hiss of weapons priming. Rylan moved around the perimeter, searching for anything he could use, structural supports, energy relays, even loose plating. He had fought in tight quarters before, but this chamber left him exposed. The predator shifted again, its chains groaning. If you release me, I can protect you. And if I release you, the council will think I've unleashed a weapon, Rylan countered. They will think that regardless, the predator said, voice steady. But if they kill you in this room, your people will suffer the consequences. Rylan stopped moving. His mind ran the angles, weighing consequences on a scale that seemed increasingly meaningless. Maybe the council would blame him. Maybe the galaxy would fear what happened next. But if he did nothing, both of them would be executed in a staged tragedy designed to reshape political borders. The lights flickered again. A muffled explosion quivered through the air vents. The predator's expression hardened, its eyes sharpening to predatory slits. The breach is beginning. Rylan approached the chain anchor points. Thick, reinforced, built to hold something that could tear through armored plating. He checked the clamps, magnetic seals bound them to the floor, but he recognized the emergency release design. A manual override required 2 commands, one for disengagement, one for authorization. Tell me your name, he said without looking up. The predator paused as if surprised. Kale Vor. All right, Kale. If I free you, you follow my lead. No killing unless they give us no choice. Kale inclined his head. Your command is accepted. Rylan entered the sequence, bracing himself. The locks disengaged with a thunderous crack, releasing the first chain. Cale inhaled sharply, the motion almost reverent. Rylan repeated the action, freeing the remaining restraints until Cale stood unbound for the first time since his capture. The creature stretched, muscles rippling like living armor, but held its ground with disciplined restraint. The door at the far end clicked. Not the usual magnetic lock, this was manual access from the outside. The dragoons had arrived. "Stay behind me," Rylan whispered, though part of him knew how absurd that sounded. Cale stepped to his side anyway. "Brother of blood," he murmured, "I have watched your species for years. You fight not with claws or brute strength but with strategy, adaptation, cunning. My people call that the predator's mind. Yours is the sharpest I have witnessed." Rylan didn't have time to absorb the weight of those words. The door split open, and smoke drifted into the chamber as 3 armored dragoons advanced in a tight formation, rifles raised. Darrix Vol led them, expression carved into disdainful satisfaction. "Step away from the creature, Ward," Darrix ordered. "Council's done debating. We're here to contain the threat." "Contain," Rylan repeated, tasting the lie. "You triggered the alarms. You cut the controls. This was never containment." Darrix smirked. "You always were too perceptive for your pay grade." Cale tensed, the air around him thickening with restrained violence. Rylan extended a hand subtly, signaling him to stay grounded. "Darrix," Rylan said, voice controlled, "you execute him and every Varshan war chief will descend on the council. You know that." "That's the point," Darrix answered. "War's good business." Cale exhaled a low sound that might have been a growl. Rylan felt its vibration through the soles of his boots. Darrix lifted his rifle slightly. "Move aside." Rylan didn't. For a moment, silence settled in the chamber, heavy enough to bend thought. Rylan measured the distance between them. Cale evaluated angles of attack. Darrix counted how many witnesses would need erasing. Then something unexpected happened. Cale spoke first, voice calm and cutting. "You fear me? Yet it is him you should fear." Rylan didn't understand the meaning until he saw Darrix flinch, ever so slightly, as if the predator had spoken a truth he had tried to bury. Darrix recovered quickly, raising his weapon. "Enough stalling." He never finished. A deafening crash shook the chamber as the ceiling vent ruptured, dropping debris that forced the dragoons to stagger back. Smoke obscured their advance. Alarms shifted into urgent distortion. Cale stepped forward, his silhouette expanding into a towering wall of muscle and intent. Rylan squared his stance beside him. Whatever came through that door next, bullets, blades, or betrayal, they would face together. And for the first time since entering the council, Rylan no longer felt alone. The smoke curled upward in agitated spirals as the chamber lights struggled against the sudden darkness. Rylan moved first, dragging Cale with him toward the cover of a collapsed support beam. The dragoons fired blind into the haze, their plasma bolts carving fissures of molten blue into the walls. The concussive blasts rattled the chamber, but Cale remained unervingly calm, each movement deliberate, controlled, predatory. Rylan's mind raced. The ceiling vent hadn't collapsed on its own, someone else had forced it. Yet he saw no new attackers, no reinforcements. The sabotage was designed not to eliminate the dragoons, but to create chaos. Someone wanted the mercenaries thrown off balance long enough for something else to happen. Darrix barked a command, his voice reverberating through the smoke. "Find the human. Kill the beast." Rylan gritted his teeth. Cale shot him a sideways glance. "They separate us. They weaken themselves." "That's an optimistic interpretation," Rylan muttered. Cale shifted, scanning for threats. "You think like prey when you are cornered. Think like a hunter." Rylan almost laughed, but he held the breath instead. Hunters planned. Hunters adapted. Hunters exploited every mistake an opponent made. The smoke thinned just enough to reveal silhouettes. The dragoons forming a triangular advance, weapons sweeping methodically. Their boots crunched over shattered glass, creating a trail of sound that betrayed their positions. Rylan's training returned in sharp flashes. Their formation left a single point exposed, the center blind to anything below chest height. He tapped Cale's arm. "Drop to the floor. Now." Cale obeyed without question. The two flattened themselves a heartbeat before a volley of fire lanced through the air above. The dragoons overshot their target. Cale's size had made them aim too high. Rylan seized the opening. He lunged forward, sweeping a fallen shard of plating across the floor. The metal screeched, drawing two dragoons' attention. Cale moved at the same instant, bounding through the haze with a speed no human could match. His claws didn't strike. Instead, he slammed both soldiers into the wall with enough force to disarm but not kill. They crumpled, armor sparking. Darix reacted too late. He fired a charged burst, but Rylan ducked, feeling the heat sear his hair. Kale hurled himself between them, intercepting a second shot with a thick forearm plated in natural armor. The impact burned a smoking welt into Kale's hide, yet the predator barely flinched. Rylan rose, fury sharpening every line of his posture. "You call that containment, Darix?" Darix spat, leveling his weapon. "It's pest control." Kale answered with a low, vibrating snarl, a sound that scraped the air like metal tearing. But Rylan stepped forward before Kale could act. He grabbed a loose conduit cable and smashed it across Darix's rifle. Sparks erupted, disabling the weapon and forcing the commander to retreat. Darix's visor flickered with static as he stumbled back. "You're siding with it? With a monster?" "With someone who saved my life," Rylan shot back. Kale straightened beside him, towering yet still composed. "He speaks truth. You do not." The remaining dragoons regrouped, dragging their injured out of Kale's reach. Their comms lit up with frantic chatter. Someone in the command wing had realized the situation was spiraling. Reinforcements would arrive soon, heavily armed and unrestrained by political optics. Rylan knew they had minutes at best. He turned to Kale. "We can't win a prolonged fight. We need to move." Kale nodded. "Agreed. But understand this, their next wave will not hesitate. They prefer corpses to witnesses." Rylan scanned the room. The sabotage had weakened the structural beams above the eastern wall. If they could force an overload on the energy relays, they might create an exit, but the blast radius could tear the entire wing apart. He assessed Kale's condition. The burn across his arm smoked faintly, but the predator held himself tall, unbroken. Rylan realized something then. Kale wasn't simply protecting him out of obligation. The Varshan warrior watched him the way a soldier does a trusted commander, waiting for direction. Rylan approached a sparking terminal. "I can reroute enough power to blow that wall open, but the blast might bring half the corridor down. We'll only get one chance." Kale stepped beside him. "Then we must not hesitate." Rylan worked quickly, fingers flying over the manual controls. He bypassed failsafes and severed the system link, isolating a dangerous amount of energy into the relay coil. The terminal whined as pressure built, its casing trembling violently. Kale moved into position, preparing to shield Rylan from the initial shock. Darix's voice rang out behind them. "Ward, step away from that console. I'm giving you one last chance." Rylan didn't look back. "You already used your last chance." The relay shrieked as it overloaded. Rylan slammed his palm on the ignition. The explosion erupted with blinding force. The eastern wall disintegrated into a storm of debris and blazing light. Heat roared past them, followed by a gust of frigid air from the exposed corridor beyond. Kale shielded Rylan through the initial wave, his bulk absorbing the brunt of it. When the dust settled, a jagged opening gaped where the wall had stood. Rylan staggered, coughing but conscious. Kale steadied him. Behind them, Darix struggled to rise, his armor cracked and flickering. He stared at the breach with disbelief and fury. "You're making a mistake, Ward," he rasped. "You think that thing won't tear you apart the moment it feels like it?" Kale turned, eyes glowing with cold fire. "You assume I am like you." Darix opened his mouth, but the sentence never formed. The structural beams groaned ominously, signaling more collapses. Kale pulled Rylan toward the opening. "We must go," he said. Rylan met Darix's glare one final time. The commander's expression was a portrait of wounded pride and deepening hatred, a promise that the conflict was far from over. Rylan stepped through the breach with Kale close behind. The corridor beyond was dim, lit only by emergency strips that flickered in and out of existence. It stretched ahead like a path into unknown danger. Kale paused at the threshold and looked back. The dragoons were recovering, shouting orders, preparing to pursue. Rylan tightened his jaw. "They won't stop." "No," Kale agreed, "but neither will we." They disappeared into the darkened corridor as the collapsed chamber rumbled behind them, sealing off any return. Ahead lay the underbelly of the council station, uncharted, dangerous, and now their only escape route. And somewhere in those shadowed halls, the true architects of this betrayal waited. The corridor beyond the breach seemed to breathe, the emergency strips flickering in uneven pulses that cast Rylan and Kale into alternating bands of light and shadow. The air tasted of scorched circuitry and cold metal, and each footstep echoed with an eerie hollowness. Rylan kept his pace measured, alert to every creak in the station's wounded structure. Kale moved beside him with fluid precision, his vast frame somehow silent despite the damage he had already endured. "They'll regroup quickly," Rylan said, scanning the junction ahead. "Darrix won't let this go." Kale's voice rumbled low. "He chases pride, not strategy. Pride blinds hunters to snares. You think we can use that against him?" "We must." Rylan paused at a branching hallway, its signage flickering too erratically to decipher. He accessed a wall console, hoping for a map, but its display erupted in static. The system had been tampered with. Someone was deliberately erasing traces of their path. Not the Dragoons. This kind of sabotage required skill beyond brute force tactics. Kale studied the floor, claws tapping lightly. The trail ahead carries residue of grav boot patterns. Smaller units. Specialized. They hunted us before, they hunt us now. Rylan exhaled slowly. The Ash Talons. Kale inclined his head, expression sharpening. Killers of silence. They leave no survivors. If they pursue, then conspiracy reaches deeper than mercenary greed. Rylan read the tension in Kale's posture. The Predator feared little, but he respected the Ash Talons enough to prepare for every possible angle of attack. Rylan adjusted his own stance, instinctively aligning with Kale's rhythm as though the two had trained together for years. They advanced down the corridor, passing flickering holograms that distorted into grotesque shapes before stabilizing. The station felt wrong, like it was being deliberately smothered. Air vents hummed irregularly, security drones lay shattered on the floor, and distant alarms cut out just as quickly as they started. Rylan murmured, "Someone's trying to erase the evidence of our chase." "Someone attempts to control the narrative," Kale replied. "A tale where we are dangers needing removal. And the Dragoons are just the blade," Rylan added. "Someone else holds the hilt." A sudden tremor rippled through the floor, throwing them slightly off balance. Kale braced Rylan instinctively, catching him with one steady hand. A vent panel ahead burst open, expelling a swarm of microdrones that darted toward them with needle-like appendages glinting. Rylan dropped, narrowly avoiding a spray of electrified threads. Kale swept an arm through the swarm, scattering drones like insects against a storm. The Predator's claws tore through their delicate frames, sparks splattering across the floor. "They adapt quickly," Rylan said, rising. Kale inspected a fragment of drone casing. "These were not built for observation. They target joints, arteries and nerves. They were deployed to disable you." Rylan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the corridor's temperature. "So the real threat isn't you. It's me." Kale looked at him with an intensity that held no doubt. "Yes." Rylan accepted that truth silently. Someone feared what he knew, or feared what he might learn if he survived long enough to speak to the Council. They reached a maintenance shaft, its door half melted. Kale pried the metal aside effortlessly, revealing a dim passage descending into the station's industrial levels. Rylan switched on a wrist light and stepped in. The walls narrowed, the temperature rising from the hum of machinery below. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became. Halfway down the ladder, Kale spoke quietly. "You are injured." "It's minor," Rylan answered. "You favor your left side. Pain alters judgment." Rylan didn't argue. The ache along his ribs had been growing steadily since their escape from the chamber. "I'll manage." Kale made a low sound, not disapproval but recognition of human stubbornness. "You are resilient. But resilience is not invulnerability." Rylan almost smiled. "You're starting to sound like a squad medic." The faintest glimmer of amusement flickered in Kale's eyes. "My people do not have medics. We endure or we perish. That explains your bedside manner." They reached the bottom of the shaft and slipped into a cavernous manufacturing deck filled with dormant machinery. Holographic panels glowed faintly, casting pale reflections across metal catwalks suspended above vats of coolant. The silence here felt deliberate, as though sound itself had been banished. Rylan crouched, scanning the catwalks. "The Ash Talons will use the height." "They already have." Kale's sudden stillness was the only warning before a blade flashed from above, slicing down where Rylan had stood an instant earlier. Kale shoved him aside and caught the attacker mid-descent, slamming the armored talon into the railing hard enough to warp steel. Another assailant lunged from the shadows, muted movements betraying ruthless training. Rylan intercepted this one, blocking the blade with a grasp on the attacker's wrist and using their momentum to throw them off the platform. The talon landed in a controlled roll, sprang up and vanished into darkness again. Kale dispatched his opponent with clinical precision, disabling rather than killing. They will not stop, he said, scanning the void. They stalk us until exhaustion. Then we change the rules, Rylan replied. We make them chase us somewhere they can't disappear. He pointed toward a large transport lift at the far end of the deck. Its access lights still flickered green, one of the few systems untouched by sabotage. Cale nodded. A confined ascent. If they follow, they lose their advantage. And if they don't follow, Rylan said, we get to the command level. Together they ran, Cale shielding Rylan from the occasional projectile that whistled from unseen perches. They reached the lift, slammed the activation panel, and slipped inside just as two talons dropped from the ceiling like shadows given form. The doors sealed with a heavy clang, muffling the sudden barrage of strikes from outside. The lift descended, humming as it carried them upward. Rylan leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Cale stood at his side, posture unyielding, eyes fixed on the narrowing sliver of darkness below. You fought as one of us, Cale said quietly. Not prey. Not prey at all. Rylan managed a strained breath. Good. Because I think things are about to get worse. Cale turned toward him. The truth awaits at the top. Rylan nodded. And so does whoever's been pulling the strings. The lift continued to rise, carrying them toward the heart of the conspiracy, toward answers, danger, and the confrontation their enemies had desperately tried to prevent. The lift doors groaned open onto the command level, a panoramic view of the Council's central nexus stretching before them. Holographic displays blinked erratically, alarms reverberated, and dozens of Council operatives froze in the sudden, unexpected presence of a Varshan predator standing beside a human. Rylan adjusted his stance instinctively, hand hovering near his sidearm, while Cale's towering silhouette radiated calm authority, a predator who refused to be tamed by fear or hierarchy. Darrix Vol emerged from the shadows, his armor scorched but intact, flanked by a half-dozen ash talons. Ward, he growled, voice dripping with venom, you've led us right into the Council's heart. You think your friend here can protect you? Cale's eyes glowed gold, pupils narrowing. I do not think, Darrix. I know. Rylan felt the predator shift, muscles coiling like steel springs. He realized that this wasn't just raw strength, it was calculation, strategy, and unyielding loyalty combined. He had never fought alongside anything like Cale before. The creature had adapted to him, to his thinking, anticipating every reaction. And in return, Rylan trusted him fully. For the first time in years, that trust felt like more than survival. It felt like power. Darrix barked a command. The ash talons lunged, rifles charging, blades slicing the thin air. The first talon fired. Cale moved before the projectile left the barrel, a blur of black and gold that deflected plasma bolts with armored forearms and pinned the attacker against a console. Rylan advanced, using the distraction to disable another talon with a well-placed strike to the knee, wrenching the weapon from his grasp. They moved together, synchronized, predator and human, each anticipating the other's moves with unspoken coordination. The chamber erupted into chaos, bodies crashing, sparks flying, and alarms screaming louder than ever. Cale leapt to intercept Darrix, slamming him into a hollow console. The force sent the display cracking, data cascading like digital blood. Darrix's face twisted in shock, disbelief and rage. He had trained to hunt the apex predators of the galaxy, yet here he was, pinned by one standing loyally at a human's side. His authority, carefully curated over years, shattered in a heartbeat. Rylan seized the moment. He leapt forward, grabbing the control panel nearest the chamber's core. With quick fingers, he rerouted the security grid, locking doors behind them and activating emergency turrets aimed precisely at anyone trying to flank them. The room transformed from battlefield to choke point, Cale the bulwark at its center. Together, they turned the Council's own systems into instruments of survival. Darrix recovered and charged, but Cale intercepted with a sweep of his massive arm, sending Darrix sprawling across the floor. Rylan, moving with precision honed by countless battles, kicked the rifle from Darrix's grasp and pressed his sidearm to the commander's chest. The air between them was thick with tension, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Darrix's pride, hatred, and fear all condensed into that moment, and Rylan understood the magnitude of what had occurred. A predator had chosen a human, not as prey, not as a subordinate, but as equal. And that choice had shifted the balance of power in the chamber. You lose, Darrix, Rylan said, voice steady. Not because you were weaker, but because you underestimated loyalty and strategy. Cale's growl punctuated the words, a promise and a warning. Darrix's lips twisted into a bitter smile. This isn't over, he spat. Even the Council will. Before he could finish, the remaining talons froze as the Council's oversight systems broadcasted the entire confrontation across every major terminal in the Nexus. Every member of the Council and every operative witnessing the chaos saw Kale standing protectively beside a human. The Predator's actions, previously dismissed as dangerous, now demonstrated honor, control, and intelligence beyond the Council's narrow prejudices. Rylan realized in that moment that the galaxy itself was watching, judging, and listening. The Council erupted into arguments, panic, and disbelief. Attempts to intervene were hampered by the automated security measures Rylan had activated. Kale advanced slowly, deliberately, showing restraint while still exuding lethal power. Every movement communicated one thing: attack us and consequences will extend far beyond this room. Rylan moved closer to Kale, hand brushing lightly against the Predator's arm. "Ready?" he asked. Kale inclined his head, eyes narrowing. "Always." Together, they pushed forward, clearing the remaining talons with a mixture of brute force and tactical precision. Kale's strength shattered weapons and armor, while Rylan anticipated enemy positioning, controlling the battlefield as if it were an extension of his own instincts. By the time they reached Darrix, the commander's strength was broken, his command structure in ruins, and his men either incapacitated or fleeing. Rylan leveled his sidearm again. "You can fight me or you can survive this. Your choice." Darrix hesitated, fear finally overtaking pride. He knew he had no path to victory, no angle to exploit. The Predator beside Rylan was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of everything he had underestimated. A human had earned a Predator's loyalty. That simple truth rendered his lifetime of preparation meaningless. Kale's gaze locked onto Darrix, unyielding. "End this," Rylan said, voice low. Kale's clawed hand hovered near Darrix's shoulder. He did not strike, but the implication was clear. Death was possible. Mercy was a choice. Darrix fell to one knee, chest heaving, gaze flicking between the human and the Varshan. Rylan holstered his weapon. "Consider this a lesson," he said. "We don't fight because we enjoy it. We fight because it's necessary." Kale exhaled, a low vibration that signaled satisfaction without malice. He stepped back, allowing Rylan to stand fully between him and the fallen commander. The room, once a battlefield, now stood in silence, the echoes of chaos lingering like smoke. Across the Nexus, the Council adjusted, some members stepping forward to acknowledge the truth they had witnessed, others recoiling in disbelief. Rylan realized that loyalty, courage, and strategy had just rewritten the rules of engagement for every species present. Humans had proven themselves not just capable, but worthy of trust in ways the Council had never anticipated. Rylan placed a hand on Kale's arm. "We've survived today," he said, voice quiet yet resonant. "But there's more ahead." Kale inclined his massive head, golden eyes reflecting the dim light. "The galaxy will learn to respect humans or it will learn to fear them." Rylan allowed a small smile to form. It was a smile built from victory, understanding, and the quiet thrill of having defied expectations. He had faced the apex predator, had earned its loyalty, and now the universe had witnessed it. That bond, forged in fire and blood, was a force beyond weapons, beyond mercenaries, beyond politics. Together, human and predator turned toward the observation windows, gazing out at the stars they had fought so hard to survive. Each one now seemed smaller, each one now part of a galaxy that had begun to recognize a simple truth. When a human earns a predator's loyalty, the universe itself must pay attention. And somewhere in the shadows, those who had sought to manipulate, betray, and ignite war now understood the gravity of their failure. Rylan and Kale stood at the center of a new order, unbroken, united, and unstoppable, a partnership that would echo across the stars.